Dr. Margaret, I am super excited to have you on the show today because if there's one thing that we all need right now, it's somebody with your credentials. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I need some therapy myself, actually. So this is great, and laughing is always good.
It's always good. I started out saying that people really need this right now, but I always love starting off with where people grew up and what their parents did for a living, and then. In your case, I hit the lottery because your dad was a funeral director
That's right.
in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So I guess the low-hanging fruit question is, what was it like having a dad in Arkansas who was a funeral director?
Well, I was known as the digger's daughter, basically. So,
Oh, no.
actually, my dad was really loved in the community because he was known for his generosity and his kindness. And actually, the family had been in the funeral business. My dad was the third generation, and my brother went in, and now my nephew's there. So we have 5 generations of Robinsons that have the funeral home. So, and it was weird. I worked there during the summers, Rob, and so I would go in and check on people and make sure their flowers were okay. And so I got kind of accustomed to death. And I think the funniest thing that would happen, small town in Arkansas. I'd pick up the phone and answer it, Ralph Robinson and Son, and people would say, "Who have you got?" And I'd say, "Ma'am, excuse me, who have you got down there?" Like they wanted to know who was dead and who they could come see. And I of course, would tell them, but it was kind of an odd thing. And my dad used to joke that if you were ever, of course, this was in the 50s, 60s and that kind of thing. And he would say, if you ever need to find the widow, call her beauty salon. So
It's so crazy. Did you actually go into, I guess the embalming room would be what it's called. Did you actually go in there?
no, you weren't allowed. I mean, that, only licensed people could go in there, but you could hear the actual embalming going on. It kind of made this whoosh sound. And so,
Oh,
yeah. So anyway, it was, I sang a lot. And so I actually sang for a lot of funerals. And so I would get back there and, sing something that meant something to the deceased. And then I would have the job. I would, during the summers, take up the vacation time for the secretaries. And it was, it's interesting that I've turned out to be a therapist because I think I could hear my dad's compassion for people, and death is just a part of life. So he was. Both his father died when my dad was 15, and I remember reading in the paper that the church, there were people lined up the streets to say goodbye to my grandfather, and people of all races and ethnicities just loved him. And I think the same was true of my dad and my brother, who's now also deceased. But anyway, it's a hard business to be in. And my dad used to say, the older I get, the harder it is because you're burying your friends. And so that was really hard. And my mother made him promise when they got married that she would never live over the funeral home. And so we never did.
that's
We
a
always
thing,
had a
right?
separate home. Oh yeah. A lot of people will save money. And, but it was a little creepy. There's no doubt about it at times. But, I just, like I say, my dad he knew the right things to say. So did my brother. So does my nephew. And it's a time when people are confused and they're often, they don't know what to do. They've never had this happen. So anyway, it's an honor to be. And as a therapist, I do the same thing. Often people are facing losses and that are tremendous, or pandemics that are truly a once in a lifetime kind of experience. So
Yeah,
I hope I like him.
that's how all this stuff ties together, right? How we're
Yeah.
born, nature and nurture. I mean, you certainly know that in your line of work. So, I want to talk about your mom for another moment, or I'd
Imagine.
like to talk about your mom for a moment. Class and elegance was something that
Yes.
was really important to her. Okay, so you learn to do things like walk with a book on your head,
I
uh,
did. I took
to
etiquette from Miss Vashti Triplet, actually in the home where my father was born. So that was kind of wild. But yeah, I class and elegance, and she was all of that. I don't think she would get up at some god awful hour of the morning and get on her makeup. I don't. She never took it off. She went to sleep with it because she didn't want Dad to see her without makeup, and she'd get up before he got up and reapply it. And my brother Spencer used to say he just thought Mom was a princess because she was always so beautiful and so well dressed.
have you ever heard of the television show The Marvelous Miss Maisel?
Yes, and I've watched a little bit of it and then something pulled my attention away, but I have heard about that show. I certainly have.
The reason why I ask you about that is that time with certain types of women,
Yeah.
there was a scene in one of the opening episodes where the mother would lie in bed with her makeup on, and she'd look over to see if the husband passed out, asleep. And the moment he went to sleep, she got up and put the cold cream on and took the makeup off and went to
Yeah,
bed,
yeah.
and then got up and did it earlier before he woke up in the morning.
It was
You know.
it was incredible. I mean, and unfortunately, I guess you're asking about her mainly because she also developed a prescription drug addiction. She had a lot of anxiety. I have to tell you though, the funniest because my mother had grown up poor. I mean, her family was poor, and then my grandfather, her father, had a lumber yard which did very well, and so they ended having money. But my dad said he and my mom were on their honeymoon, and they ordered breakfast, and she ordered over easy eggs, and they came, and she looked at them, and she goes, "Rob." His name was Rob. Rob, I just have a question. And he goes, "What?" He goes, "How do they get the yellows in the middle?"
Wow.
Dad said, "Oh no, I'm not. I have some problems." So anyway, and she hated to cook, and she didn't cook actually. So we had housekeepers and that kind of thing that came in and did all that kind of stuff. So it was if you've seen the movie The Help, that is exactly what my life was like. And I
Oh.
knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong with all that, and used to tell my mom that there was this babysitter that was very rude to our housekeeper Ernestine at the time, and I begged my mom not to let that woman come and babysit us. And to her credit, she did not. But those were hard times for African Americans, and it was just a strange existence. And then the schools didn't integrate until I was a junior in high school. So
Mm.
which neither the Black kids didn't want to integrate, at all. They liked their school, and so there was a lot of, and there were a lot of Caucasians that were upset about it. But it was, in fact, my dad fought for it. He said, this is what is needed." So,
Mm.
but my mom, she developed panic attacks in her 30s, or panic and anxiety. And back then, I have a psychiatrist friend who calls them excuse my French, but the fucked up 50s women. And because they were they were just handed benzodiazepines and tranquilizers and oh honey, you just got nerves. Your nerves are out of whack. And doctor after doctor just prescribed her this stuff. And so she ended having an addiction to them. And she would always say, "Well, they're prescribed." And I'd say, "Mom," and I was in graduate school, and I figured out what she was taking. And I said, "Oh, Mom, this is terrible. This is horrible." And as she tried to get off of them, she really couldn't. She began physically deteriorating. And so we had to, and she voluntarily went into a rehab, a residential rehab. She was there for 3 months, but sadly, Rob, tragically, really, she didn't know how to live without them. And so all of that joy or laughter or any kind of fulfillment she had in life, which was, oh, I don't know, she never had any self-esteem. And so, but even any fight and joy was gone. And she just, the last 15 years of her life, she was almost mute. So, I have really although mother taught me a lot of things, I had anorexia because she was also anorexic, and she taught me a lady doesn't, a lady doesn't clean her plate, and so I never did, and I've had to fight the idea that you can be a powerful woman and you're not doing something wrong. I had to learn that, and it was just uh, she did her best, and she really wanted me to have a better life than her, and I know I have had a happier life than my mom has had. With
I
all
want to,
its ups and downs, it's been happier than hers.
yeah, certainly lessons you've learned from it, and perhaps maybe even the kind of work that you do has come out of those experiences, et
Oh,
cetera.
exactly.
So I want to go down this panic attack path if I
Yep,
could, because I
you
know that
betcha.
this is in your wheelhouse. So
Yeah, I have
I
them.
okay, well good because not good but good. Um,
With
so
me humility, actually.
I bet. I bet. So I want to. I'd like to be. I'd like this to be as productive for the listener as I can, and I always try
You
and be
betcha.
as vulnerable as I know to be.
Hmm.
And in probably maybe about a month or two after COVID
Hmm.
came, um, I live in Los Angeles, and I started to notice that there were lockdowns that were becoming like this was real. Like we were starting to get locked down.
Hmm.
And I have a history of not panic attacks, never had one in my life, but I have a history of claustrophobia. In the
Okay.
right circumstances, if I get into an elevator that's too crowded, it just doesn't feel good. I'm
Just
not
kind of
crazy.
gets clammy and
Yeah,
sweaty and
yeah, yeah. If but ironically, if I'm on an airplane, it doesn't bother me. If I'm in a
interesting.
restaurant, I don't have to face the window. If I feel like I can't get out, it upsets me in some weird way. I felt like if I had to get out of a plane, I could probably there's probably a parachute or something. I don't know. In my head, there's some way I could get out of it. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel as bad. So that's the only history with this. As these lockdowns started, one day I went to the gym and I couldn't get into the gym because it was locked, and they said we're
Yeah,
closed. I felt claustrophobia, and it was the first
really.
time I was outside and felt claustrophobia. Then
Hmm.
I said, okay, I'll go work out in the park. I went to the park, and the police had taped off the park. You can't use the park either because everybody went to the parks. And I felt it again. And
Hmm.
as things started, I started to notice this claustrophobia when I was not in situations that I ever felt claustrophobic before.
Hmm.
One night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and my heart was pounding out of my chest where I thought I was having a heart attack. And I looked up at the ceiling, and the ceiling looked like it was coming in on me. I went
Hmm.
upstairs and I looked across the street, and the house across the street looked like it was moving in. And then I
Hmm.
went to the backyard, and it looked like the trees were coming in.
Hmm.
And I mean, I was going out of my mind. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I just stayed up for a few hours and eventually just passed out asleep. Woke up the next morning, it was fine. I woke up every morning with that same exact pattern for probably the next 3 to 4 weeks. And I later diagnosed myself with this panic attack disorder. That now, if someone talks about, hey, LA is going to go into lockdown again, I could literally go into that panic.
You'll feel it. Hmm.
I'll feel it. What's going on? Because I know a lot of people that I've spoken to either on the podcast or in person have some version of a
Hmm.
panic attack type thing. I gave you my story, but they have their own.
Hmm.
What is going on in the body? Why is this happening? Why does it wake me up in the middle of the night? What's going on here?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you called it a panic attack because you had said, "Oh, I've never had a panic attack," and I thought, "Yes, you have. At this
Yeah,
point, you
yeah,
have. You had
yeah.
never had one before."
Right.
I think your word "trapped," Rob, is what's important here. People, I know people who have social anxiety, for example, and what they will talk about their social anxiety because they feel trapped at a party. They feel trapped if they go to a club meeting, or they feel like I have to be a certain way. And so I think that whole sense of being trapped. Neurologically, what's going on is your amygdala, that little tiny structure in your brain, is beginning to alert you like there's danger, there's danger. And so the, I won't go through the whole series, but there's a cycle that begins to start happening, and adrenaline and cortisol are released, and then it's just free floating in your body um, until it gets turned off, because until you can sort of self-soothe and it begins to turn off. And so that's why you have that tunnel vision, because it affects all your senses. Sometimes people smell odd things, sometimes they hear things, but with you, it's more visual. And you're right. I mean, this last year has certainly been very trying, especially for anyone who has any kind of anxiety. It has definitely been fueled or inflamed, or whatever we want to say. It's kind of like, um, you have if you have a wound and it scabs over, it doesn't take much to just flick that scab and it starts bleeding again. It may not come all the way off, but my guess is that we have all felt that our freedoms have been taken away, that the things we do to calm down, to work out, to get out in the park, to go out to restaurants, to just be connected socially, that has been taken away because of the pandemic, and it has. And so those distractors, those calmer downers, those anything that can, help you deal with just sort of daily stress, that we all have. And yet there's no way to release it really. And so you've had to find other ways. And in the process of that, even, when you feel that tug, when you feel that sudden, oh my gosh, the room is spinning, or I can only see certain things, that is that cortisol being released again. And what happens is that once that neural pathway is established, then it becomes easier. It doesn't take as much for that to be triggered. In fact, what can actually happen, and what has happened to me many a time, is that you can become more afraid of the anxiety than you are. And even the fear of becoming anxious is a trigger for
All
that
right,
cortisol to be released.
let's stop there because you nailed it. So now,
Yeah.
trying to go to bed at night, I feel great, had no issue, but because I've woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I have now cued and primed my brain for sleep equals wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a heart attack, right?
That's
So
right.
now insomnia comes on.
Mm-hmm.
Where I don't want to go to sleep because I don't want to wake up like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of questions in that area. It sounds to me like the amygdala is releasing the hormones that you discussed. I don't know exactly what it releases,
Well,
cortisol,
actually, the
adrenaline.
amygdala just signals to the hypothalamic structure to actually start releasing
All right.
kind of that kind of thing, and the thalamus is involved. Anyway, yeah,
All right. So basically, it starts this cascade, right?
yes,
It
it
starts.
does.
All right. That is why does your brain think that there is well, I guess this is getting a little bit deep, but on a subconscious level, I'll use my example. I was asleep. So I could argue, well, I wasn't thinking about anything, but I'm sure you would say, oh, yes, you were. Your subconscious was going.
You're
What,
unconscious. Mm-hmm.
my unconscious, okay.
Mm-hmm.
What was my unconscious doing that caused it to signal the amygdala while I was sleeping?
Well, okay. So panic attacks that wake people up in sleep are fairly common. Okay. And so my psychologist answer, and remember, I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD. So my psychologist answer and my therapist answer is that there are some issues that you're having in your lifetime about this whole pandemic, I mean, you were claustrophobic for some reason.
For
And
sure.
so, I don't know what that's about from your history. If you gave me your history, I could probably go, maybe that's it. But something, you don't want to be restrained. You don't want to feel like you can't get out of a situation. And so, my guess is that you may not be dealing with that on a conscious level as much as perhaps would be helpful to you to do. And so your unconscious is sending up a flare. Rob, Rob, Rob. And so you may be dreaming about it and you don't realize it, or you're just your unconscious mind is incredible. I've been hypnotized before, and I was a skeptic. I mean, I thought, oh, sure, and what hypnosis is all about is trying to connect with your unconscious mind. And I will never forget, this therapist said, yeah, I was in a quote unquote trance, which just means you're relaxed, very, very relaxed. And he said, in a minute, your right hand will raise, but you won't be telling it to do that. And I kind of smiled, went, yeah, right. And so then he, kept on going. And sure enough, Rob, here came my hand, and I started laughing. I was like, and then he said, and pretty soon it'll come down. It's the power of suggestion. And it did. And so what the unconscious mind is doing is that it's serving as what's a good way to say this? It's watching, it's observing. It is the observing mind. It's a lot of people, and I happen to be one of them, thinks it's the wisest part of your mind, where it's not trying to make you scared at night when you wake up. It is trying to get your attention to think there's something I'm not paying attention to consciously. Yeah. And so the unconscious mind almost serves like he's bringing, let's give it a he, I guess.
Yeah.
He's bringing you this message of, Rob, you're too uptight, or Rob, you're worried about some things, or you've got some things on your mind, or, probably if I were your therapist, I'd suggest some meditation. I would suggest trying to learn that to quiet your mind. And, it's not a great idea to drink so you go to sleep or use some sort of drugs to go to sleep. It's just better to try to say, what am I not addressing?
Okay.
About my kids, whatever.
All right, you nailed it again. So then I went down, because I live in LA, I'm in the land of La La Land over here. You can walk on yoga teachers and meditation people across the heads of them in this town. I finally decided to do a 4-day transcendental meditation thing. And it was wonderful. It was really great, twice a day for 20 minutes. I figured if it's good enough for Seinfeld and Ellen and Howard Stern and all those people, it's good enough for me. And it was quite transformative in allowing me to relax. But the thing that actually helped me the most, and I'd love your take on this, and then we'll move on to another area, is me, I don't know how else to say this, but yelling at myself, where I woke up, I started to feel it, and in my head, I was talking to myself, and I said, we're done with this. Not another minute, not another second.
Now, wait a minute. This was a dream, or this was...
No, this was me waking up with my heart pounding. And instead of leaning into what I was naturally feeling, room closing in, heart pounding, freaked out, I said, enough, no more. You're not going to kill me, or if you're going to kill me, do it now, because I'm going to sleep. I can't deal with this, not another second. The moment I did that, it stopped. It's like I was able to talk myself out of it, and I don't understand that. What is going on there?
Well, you did a combination of things. Panic has never killed anybody. So
it feels like it will.
I know. Listen, I've had plenty of it. I know how it feels.
Yeah.
I get it. But you address that first. This is not going to kill me. And I accept them. It's almost like you said, something happened in that transcendental meditation that you called it transformative. I'd love to hear more about that. But there was something about within, you got back in the same environment where you had been before. And here comes this neural, you've been down this path before. You've got all your triggers. You're in your own bed. You're not doing anything different. And you just said, I don't want to do this. And I don't have to do this. This is not going to kill me. If it happens, it happens, but I'm not going to allow myself to escalate it by getting more afraid of it and you disempowered it. It
So
sounds like.
you can do that. So for people listening with panic, is there a technique that you recommend if somebody is feeling panic right now?
Well, I think the whole you used a term that I like to use, which is you lean into it. Now you're using a different way. You didn't want to lean in, but I love the idea of naming your panic. Reed Wilson talks about this. He's a great anxiety therapist in North Carolina, and he's written a lot of books, and he's on YouTube. And he's where I got this thought. But you want to detach from your panic. You don't want to say, "I am panicked. I am anxious." It's anxiety is happening to me.
Mm,
This is happening to me, and I don't. It's like a stranger walking in your house and invading your house. And what you said was, "Go away. I don't want you in my house." Now, is that easy for everybody? No, obviously it's not. The transcendental meditation probably helped you a lot. But what I find, I call my anxiety, and I'm not, well, it is funny because I want it to be a little humorous. I call it Bob.
hmm
And where I first feel anxiety is my legs start feeling real wobbly and shaky. And so when I feel that at this point, I say, Bob's come to visit. I know why, because I'm usually I also don't like crowds. I'm in a crowd. It feels stuffy. I feel pressure to be pleasant, which is kind of, to be socially, I'm sort of an introvert. And so I'm
hmm
supposed to, say hello to everybody and all this stuff. So anyway, I feel that pressure. But instead of going, "Oh no, I'm becoming anxious, what is going to happen?" I just say, "Hello, Bob. I'm going to focus externally. I'm going to focus on other things other than you creeping into my entire body. And if I change my focus, then you will go away because I'm not feeding you.
It's great.
I'm
That's
not
great.
saying let you in, come on in my house, sit down, have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, no, I'm not going to focus on you. I'm aware of your presence, but I'm not going to focus on you because that will only make you more panicked."
It's interesting. Two things. One is you triggered when you said you almost make it funny with Bob. I had one person who actually trumped you on that. He said, "When I get anxiety, I've labeled him, and he's a gay designer named Nigel." And I say, "Oh, Nigel, not again." And he said, it
Yeah.
makes me laugh, and
Yes.
it helps interrupt the
Yes.
pattern."
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
with TM, what triggered the TM was I listened to an interview that Jerry Seinfeld did with Tim Ferriss,
Mhm.
and they talked about. Tim Ferriss said, I know you've been doing TM. How long you been doing it?" He said 40 years, and he said I would have never
Wow.
gotten through Seinfeld without it. And he said, there's a big difference between the brain and the mind.
Mm.
The brain, he said, I think is like a schnauzer. And he said the mind, that's a whole different game, but the brain is very predictable. If I tell you I'm going to run, last time you ran from here to that light post, you did it in 2.5 minutes. Now go run it again. I know you're going to try and do it in less than 2.5 minutes. Like
Yeah.
that's just like we're very predictable in that way. And so
Mhm.
the TM, what it did for me was it's a very simple process. The reason why it's 4 days is mostly so that they can watch you do it and answer questions.
Mhm.
But basically, you're saying a mantra. They give you a mantra repeatedly for 20 minutes. And every time you're going to get a thought and you got to remember, you go back to the mantra and you just keep saying the mantra.
Mhm.
Somehow that mantra, when you say it over and over again, it's like you're competing between the thought and the mantra, the thought and the mantra. Then eventually it's just the mantra and the thought goes away. And then eventually it's no thought and no mantra. When that happens, that's where the transformative happens and you feel like you're coming out of your body. It's a weird
Yeah,
thing.
I know. Yeah, a little bit. I haven't. I have There's a huge meditation center, and I've forgotten what kind of meditation is, and it's right in the middle of like Iowa or something. And I had a patient go one time, and she said, "Yeah, it's the farmers and the floaters."
Farmers and floaters.
She said
Wow.
it's an odd combination of communities. So,
That's
but
awesome.
but listen to what you're saying. I mean, basically, between this mantra and this thought, your mind is going back and forth, and and you're in the present with the mantra, you're saying the present. The thought probably has something to do with either the future or the past, or it's an editorial comment. So you're asking your brain to shift back and forth. And to people with EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is great for trauma, will tell you that's exactly the technique they use in EMDR, because you're going, the therapist helps you by either tapping on you, or you're holding buzzers that go off in your right hand, then your left hand, then your right hand, then your left hand. So you are anchored in the present, but you go back, you ask your brain or your mind to go back to some memory that has a lot of emotional baggage to it. In fact, it's almost intolerable. And that going back but being in the present at the same time is what helps you. Your brain kind of turns on and recognizes, wait a minute, this also was going on back then, and this was going on. The memory becomes more complete and loses some of its emotional
Punch.
harm. Punch, great word. Emotional harm to you. So where you can tolerate it. And so even if it's with humor or just another detail that your mind, it's like a more whole memory instead of just the terror and the trauma of the memory. And
Do you do
that's what's
EMDR?
happening. I did. I was trained in EMDR and I did it for about 2 years, but I thought I needed more. It was working with my patients, but that's when I started writing the book, researching and writing for the book, and I just couldn't do both. I couldn't get further training in EMDR, so now I refer out. But I'm a huge believer in it. I had a panic attack on the road. I never had panic on an expressway. In fact, I always loved to drive. And I, one day, suddenly, about 6 or 7 years ago, I had probably the most dramatic panic attack that I've ever had, because I was driving a car. And so I was, I was scared I was going to hurt somebody or myself. So, after that, I did this EMDR training after that event, and that was my memory that I was working on. And this was just with a beginning EMDR therapist who they didn't know what they were doing, and I didn't. But even that, I had this memory became paired with another memory that I had of being out in Colorado years ago, driving to the Aspen Music School. And I felt I had my little tank top on and my scarf around my head, and I was listening to John Denver, and I was like, all right, this is cool, and so could see the Rockies in front of me, and
Rocky Mountain High.
Exactly. And I just had this empowerment. Now, what happened next was kind of funny. This huge bug flew in and splattered on my chest.
Oh no!
And so, anyway, that's where I rolled up my windows and turned on my air conditioning. But that memory made me laugh. It made me think, wait a minute, I love to drive. And since then, when I've gotten on the expressway, that's the memory I think of. Now, I still get more anxious than I used to, but that memory is now paired with that. So that's the gorgeousness of EMDR, I think.
So a good therapist, like if I chose, I think I'm going to have to book EMDR because I've heard this too many times now. If I book a session with EMDR, and I explain to them what I've explained to you about my situation, will they sort of like walk me through, tell me about the first moment of your claustrophobia, and do they like guide you through a process?
There would most likely be a session where you do, maybe a session or two where you do go back and at least chronologically go through, I had it then and I had it now. And then you want to pick a memory that that you want to focus on. And the interesting thing about EMDR is that it doesn't really matter where you start, because your mind will take you where you need to go. Then the other thing you establish in EMDR is you establish, before you ever start, you establish what they call a safe place, meaning you close your eyes and you just think, okay, where do I feel the most safe? And who is there with me? What do I feel? What do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? And you really build those memories, and you actually can even imagine people who've given you wisdom or people who you've counted on, and they're there with you, and so you get as detailed about this safe place as possible. So when you actually start the trauma work, and if it gets too overwhelming, the therapist will say, or you'll say, I need to go to my safe space. And you can
Mm.
go there and imagine you calm down and you calm down, and then you can go back if you want to. But it's amazing to me. For example, when I was taking that training and thinking about being on the road and having that panic attack, I hadn't thought about that Colorado memory in years. That would happen in my mid-20s. And so all of a sudden my mind did that work for me.
Mm.
And it was, oh, wow. And this was just one session with a volunteer, with someone who was trying to learn EMDR. So I
So
had a
it's
guy,
powerful.
I had a guy who had panic attacks about getting on a plane, and his father had gone on a trip when he was 2 and had never come home. And so there were some obvious nonverbal kind of things there that were needed to be explored. And we did EMDR together. He did a great job. And he looked at me and he goes, it's almost like I have more space in my brain
Mm.
to think about these things that have given me anxiety. And I just don't feel, using the terminology that we use with your claustrophobia, as trapped
Mm.
in the, I have to get on the plane. No, I don't. It's just, there's more space in my brain. And his anxiety got a lot better.
That's great. I want to talk to you about your book. You wrote a book called Perfectly Hidden Depression.
I did.
Before we go too deep into the book, I want to ask you whether or not the term bipolar is associated with depression. And then if it is, I have a question for you. So let me ask you that first.
Well, it is an affective disorder. Depression is an affective, meaning emotion, disorder of the emotions, and it is an affective disorder as well, and is a type of, because the cycle isn't complete without depression. Then yes, it involves depression in it.
Okay, it does. So I'm always quite confused on the term bipolar and people saying, well, I was diagnosed as clinically depressed or I was diagnosed as clinically bipolar. And I would assume that to diagnose somebody with something, that you would need something other than a conversation. You would need like a
Yeah, you
blood
need criteria. Mm-hmm.
like a well, I mean like a blood test. So in other words, if somebody says I'm clinically depressed, or even if you get over depressed, okay, let's say that clinically depressed is just criteria. When somebody is saying that they're bipolar, in my head, I'm thinking of a brain issue. Like there's an issue with the polar sides of their brain or something along those lines, and that a blood test or some sort of test would determine that. But it's not. It's
Mm-mm.
just a clinical diagnosis, which really means a conversation with somebody, a therapist, who indicates that you have reached certain criteria and then perhaps gives you a drug. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that part because that part's always confusing for me.
Okay. Um, yes, I mean that is well, it's so interesting right now to even talk about mental illness because there's a huge awareness that there are so many other systems in the body that are a part of depression occurring. I worked with Terry Cheney several months ago, and she has bipolar disorder. And she said, what I want people to start calling is mental illness is a psychoneuroimmunological disorder. So I thought that was really interesting because they're finding all kinds of things out. But to answer your question more specifically, when when I was a little girl, I had a neurological disorder, and I can remember being self-pitying mostly and saying, Mommy, I just wish that I had something wrong with me that people could see, because they just think, oh, Margaret, you know, she gets too hot. My hypothalamus didn't work correctly, and so I would have to stay out of really overheated situations. Anyway, you know, mental illness, you can see it, you can see its reflections And we certainly now are learning more and more and more about what is going on neurologically, and in different states of of emotion, or a depressed brain and a non-depressed brain looks very different on a functional MRI or an MRI, because different areas of the brain are lit up. They're excited. They're more active than other parts of the brain when you are having a manic episode or when you are having a depressive episode. So yes, there is some growing evidence. If you walk into a therapist's office, a social worker, she's not going to have access to an MRI, you know? And so, she or he has to use their best clinical judgment to say, yes, I think you have, your history indicates, um, there are signs as a child that bipolar disorder is developing. One of those is insomnia, just not sleeping well. And so certainly, and there's a genetic component, there's a trauma component, um, there's um, there's a cultural component. So you have to really look at all of that and take a really good history to know, what is someone dealing with. But and so they have to, to be clinically diagnosed, you have to fit certain criteria that is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry. I think it is psychiatry. And um, my whole point in the book, which I know we're going to get to, is that falls short sometimes. So, but for example, for bipolar disorder, there's bipolar 1, and then there's bipolar 2. And bipolar 1 means you have pretty dramatic ups and downs. Your mania looks like you're spending money you don't have, that maybe you are obsessively cleaning your house like at 3 o'clock in the morning, all this energy, or you feel incredibly euphoric, and you come up with these grand schemes of how you're going to make money. And then that lasts 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, and then you dive down into some kind of depression,
Got it.
usually a pretty severe depression. So you're looking for those cycles, and sometimes those cycles can be really rapid, and sometimes they can be more slow. But by definition, you have to have had at least one manic episode or one depressive episode to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Bipolar 2 is not really some people think of it as a smaller version of that, not as dramatic. But actually, bipolar 2 is somewhat hard to diagnose because it looks more like anxious, agitated depression. Sometimes you're just more agitated and you're a little more hypomanic, it's called, meaning not quite as manic. And then you will have this sinking down into not as dramatic a depression, but still it can be a fairly deep depression. And so the swings are more evident. In clinical depression or a major depression or even just moderate depression, you don't have those swings. Okay, you don't, when you may have swings from feeling fairly normal to feeling bad, but you haven't had any of the manic. You haven't had any hypomanic or overly euphoric, or where you just got so much energy you don't know what to do with it, and it's not like or it's not normal. So there's some subjectivity for sure with mental illness diagnoses, but at the same time, there's subjectivity in medical illnesses. I mean, you go to one MD and they say, "Oh, you've got this," and you go to another one, and they say, "Oh, no, this is what it is." So, mental illness is like that as well. So you want to try to a therapist has to be very careful that they're thinking also about what could medically be wrong. Depression hypothyroidism looks a lot like depression, but it's not. It's a thyroid disorder. You want to make sure that you're not doctors, but that you're aware of what could mimic mental illness, so that you say, go check with go to your primary care doctor and make sure she runs some tests on you to make sure all this other is right before we begin to assume that this is all mental.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, let's talk about the Perfectly Hidden Depression book that you wrote. Tell me about that.
Well, okay, so this is a great segue, actually, because the whole point of the book is that I've been a clinician, gosh, I saw my first patient in 1988. So that's a long time. Now, that was in graduate school, but I learned that there were these people that when they walked in my office, I would not diagnose them as depressed. I mean, they came in and smiling and they talked about how hard they worked and they've got great families and they're working, they're the chairperson of this nonprofit and they raised $100,000 last year. And they don't really know why they're here. They just, I don't know, something seems wrong. They get tired a lot or they realize they're sort of isolating or they're having trouble in their relationship. Maybe they have an eating disorder. Maybe they're a little on the obsessive compulsive side and that's gotten bothersome to them. But if you ask them, well, are you depressed? No. Oh, I
Feel
have
great.
so many blessings in my life. I'm good. And so they would not fit criteria. If I went, okay, do you feel hopeless? No. Do you feel helpless? No. Is your thinking foggy? No. Are you indecisive? No. Do you have low self-esteem? No. And so, but what is evident clinically in my office, that's what that means. I mean, I can see it in my clinic. They don't know how to connect with their painful emotions. If they can say, oh gosh, my best friend moved away last week and I am really sad. And they say, well, tell me about that sadness. Oh, well, she's gone and I can't really, I'm not a crier. I've just got to go on. I mean, they don't know how to connect. And so this is what I began noticing. Well, I'd been writing a blog post for 2 years by that time. So I just pulled a term out of the air, the perfectly hidden depressed person, are you one? And I wrote about these people and it went
Explodes.
viral. It went
Explodes.
viral. And so that led me to curiosity and what was out there as far as the other literature was concerned. And I just saw this gap in the literature. Academically, there was a lot of research going on that said, yes, perfectionism is a problem. Perfectionism is destructive, or can be. It's not always. But there's certain types of perfectionism that are strongly correlated with suicidality, because that's what's happening. Perfect looking people are killing themselves. And no one knows they were even depressed. No one even suspected. I've had all kinds of people contact me. My daughter, my friend, whatever, my neighbor's son. It's happening a lot. And I want, this book was about trying to find those people whose lives are all about, I need to look in control. I need to have all my ducks in a row. But what they don't want you to know is that they have this shameful voice, their own Bob, but it's about shame. And it's talking to them all the time. You'll never be worth anything. Why in the hell are you on this interview? You don't know what you're talking about. It's like you sound like an idiot. I mean, if I had it, that's what would be going on in my head. And so it's constant and they can't get away from it. And they're incredibly lonely because no one really knows who they are. They're hiding, they're pushed away. Painful experiences they had as a child, painful experiences they had in college or even as an adult, because they don't know how to deal with that. And therapy becomes learning how to do that.
I love this. Perfectly Hidden Depression. It is a fantastic read. We're going to link it up in the show notes. Before I let you go, if people are having challenges in any of the areas that we discussed, whether it's panic attacks or whether it's I love the term, hate the fact that people are going through it, but I love the term perfectly hidden depression. What's the best way for them to connect with you? And are you doing any private counseling via Zoom?
Oh, yes. But, as psychology, I can't see anyone that doesn't live in Arkansas.
Ah,
But that actually is beginning to be changed. The legislatures of several states have gotten together, and there's a bill out that is called Psych Pact, where the states make an agreement that if maybe it's Michigan and Arkansas, and then I can see people in Michigan. But the best way to do it, I have a podcast called the Self Work Podcast. It's free. I do talk about perfectly hidden depression. I talk about a lot of other things. But my patients say, it's like being in therapy with you. You just sound the same. I said,
well,
okay. And
you have a beautiful voice. So I know
well, thank you.
I know singing is got to. Next time we're going to have you sing on the show. It was fantastic. Well, Dr. Margaret, thank you for everything. We will link up your podcast, your book, website, and everything in the show notes. And I appreciate you being on the show.
Of course, I really appreciate it, Rob. Thank you so much. And my Rob, my son is in LA too, so I
And
know
your dad
exactly.
and your dad. Your dad's not in L.A., but your dad's name is Rob, right?
That's right.
Okay, so we got Robs everywhere.
That's right.
Thanks again, Doc.
You're so welcome, Rob. Thank you.